Imagine a room filled with strained silence, a group of lives held captive by decades of unspoken truths, when a single piece of paper, held in trembling hands, suddenly tears through the veil. This isn't just about a secret. It's about a desperate choice made long ago, threatening to unravel everything, yet holding the forgotten key to a hope no one dared to believe in. After listening to the whole story, you will definitely share your opinion in the comments, so let's move towards the story. The old oak conference table, polished to a dull sheen, reflected the anxious faces gathered around it. Sunlight, thin and pale, struggled through the tall windows of the attorney's office, doing little to warm the chilling silence that had settled between the three individuals. Elias, his 58 years weighing heavily on his shoulders, sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the mahogany surface. Across from him sat his younger sister, Clara, her usually vibrant eyes now shadowed with weariness, a barely suppressed impatience flickering beneath her calm exterior. Beside Clara was Michael, Elias's son, a young man of 30 who carried a quiet intensity, his brow furrowed with a mixture of concern and a thirst for answers that had long been denied to him. This was a gathering forced by circumstance, the final chapter of a saga they all wished had ended years ago. The passing of their mother, Eleanor, 6 months prior had not brought the peace they had hoped for. Instead, it had unveiled layers of logistical complexities and unspoken burdens, all tied to the large, crumbling estate she had left behind. Their family's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a man whose silver hair and kind eyes belied a formidable legal mind, cleared his throat, breaking the oppressive quiet. He held a thick file, its contents about to dictate their next steps. Yet the true weight of the moment lay not in the legalities, but in the deep, unaddressed fissures that ran through their family. As you all know, Mr. Thompson began, his voice soft but firm, Eleanor's will specifies the immediate liquidation of the estate to settle all outstanding liabilities. This includes the old family home and the remaining assets. Elias nodded curtly, a muscle ticking in his jaw. This was the part he dreaded, the official end of a legacy tainted by whispers of debt and a shadow he still couldn't quite define. Clara, however, shifted in her seat, a faint flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She had always questioned the sudden, drastic financial downturn their family had experienced after their father, Arthur, had left them decades ago. She had been a teenager then, her spirit defiant, refusing to accept the vague explanations her mother had offered. Michael, too, felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in his stomach. He had grown up with the hushed anecdotes, the subtle financial struggles, the way his grandmother, Eleanor, had always seemed burdened despite her gentle smile. He had once asked his father, Elias, about it, but Elias had always deflected, his replies clipped and dismissive, fueling Michael's quiet suspicion that there was a larger truth being withheld. He knew his grandmother had been a kind woman, but also fiercely private, especially about anything concerning his grandfather, Arthur, after his abrupt departure. The sale of the house is set for next month, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice barely audible above the rising tension. All proceeds will go directly to the remaining creditors, as Eleanor explicitly wished. It's a clean slate, finally. He gestured towards a stack of neatly bound documents on the table. I've prepared the final settlement papers for your review and signatures. Once these are signed, the process can move forward. Elias reached for the documents, his fingers brushing against the crisp paper. He scanned the headings: debt consolidation, property sale agreement, final release. Each word was a cold echo of the past. He remembered the arguments, the desperate phone calls his mother used to take in hushed tones, the gradual fading of the vibrant life they once led. His father, Arthur, had been a brilliant but impulsive businessman, prone to grand schemes that often promised much and delivered little. When he had abruptly left, leaving Eleanor and 2 young children to navigate a sudden, bewildering financial collapse, the official story had been business failure. But even then, Elias had felt a deeper, unspoken truth lurking beneath the surface. Clara, however, picked up a different document, one labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, quickly scanned the pages. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "Mr. Thompson," she asked, her voice tight. "What is this?" Her finger pointed to a section of text on one of the pages. Elias and Michael looked at her, their own expressions a mix of confusion and a nascent sense of dread. Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. "Ah, that's just some older correspondence Eleanor had with a few less conventional creditors. Nothing legally binding now, of course, given the new arrangements. Just part of the archives, really." He tried to wave it off with a dismissive hand gesture, but Clara held the document firm. "But this name," Clara pressed, her voice gaining an edge, "Mr. Reginald Thorne. And this date, it's from right after Father left. It mentions a final settlement for services rendered, including quiet adherence to the agreement made regarding the family legacy." Her voice dropped to a near whisper as she read the precise words aloud, the last phrase hanging in the air like a forbidden question. The room's quiet amplified, suddenly thick with unspoken possibilities. Elias felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Michael leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the document in Clara's hand, a sudden, sharp realization sparking behind his gaze. The air crackled with the unasked question. What agreement? What legacy? And what was the true nature of his grandfather's departure? A departure that had forever altered their family's destiny. Mr. Thompson's composed demeanor finally cracked. His eyes darted between Clara's accusing gaze and Elias's bewildered face. A subtle tension, a suppressed history, began to seep into the room, as palpable as the dust motes still dancing in the dying light. The forgotten promise, once buried under decades of silence, felt like it was finally about to be unearthed, threatening to bring with it a storm of truth no one was truly prepared for. Mr. Thompson's hesitation was a stark admission, a silent confirmation that Clara's sharp eyes had stumbled upon something far more significant than mere miscellaneous correspondence. The air in the room thickened, no longer just quiet, but heavy with the weight of decades of unspoken history. Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach, a familiar sensation from his youth, when his parents' hushed arguments would echo through the thin walls of their old home. He looked at Michael, whose young face, usually so composed, now mirrored Elias's own confusion and growing unease. Michael's gaze, however, held a sharper edge, a nascent anger at the thought of a truth withheld, a legacy obscured. "Mr. Thompson," Elias finally managed, his voice raspy, "what exactly is this agreement? And who is Reginald Thorne?" He gestured towards the document Clara still clutched, her knuckles white. The lawyer sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the burden of years. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose, a gesture that spoke of a man caught between his professional duty and a deeply personal loyalty. "Eleanor, your mother, she was a remarkable woman," Mr. Thompson began, his voice softer now, almost a lament, "and fiercely protective, especially of you, Elias, and Clara, and of Arthur's memory, despite everything." He paused, gathering his thoughts, seemingly weighing every word before it left his lips. "This correspondence, it pertains to a period shortly after Arthur's departure. His business ventures, as you know, were not always sound. In fact, one particular venture led to a catastrophic financial collapse, far beyond what was publicly known. It wasn't just a failure, Elias. It was a fraud. The word hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. Fraud. Not just bad business, but a deliberate deception. His father, Arthur, a man he had always viewed with a complex mix of resentment and a grudging respect for his ambition, was now painted in a darker, more criminal light. Clara gasped, a small, sharp sound that cut through the silence. Michael's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding, then outrage, crossing his face. This was the missing piece, the dark shadow behind the vague explanations and the years of financial strain. Arthur had taken on a massive debt, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice barely above a whisper. From some unsavory individuals, Reginald Thorne was their representative. When the scheme collapsed, Arthur was facing not just bankruptcy, but criminal charges and worse, threats against his family. Eleanor. She intervened. The lawyer's gaze met Elias's, full of a profound sadness. She made a deal, a very difficult deal, to protect you both, to protect the family name from public disgrace, and to ensure Arthur's safety. She took on the entire debt herself. In exchange, Arthur would disappear. He would leave, never to return, and the truth of his actions, and the debt would remain a secret. A quiet adherence to the agreement made regarding the family legacy. As it says there, Elias felt the blood drain from his face. His mother, Eleanor, the gentle, kind woman who had always put others first, had sacrificed her own life, her own peace, to carry this colossal burden. All these years, he had resented his father for abandoning them, for leaving them in financial ruin. But his mother had been the true victim, silently bearing the weight of a secret that had consumed her life, fading her vibrant spirit into a resigned quietness. The forgotten promise wasn't just a vague childhood memory. It was the promise she had made to protect them, a promise that had cost her everything. Clara, tears now streaming down her face, crumpled the document slightly in her hand. "She never told us," she whispered, her voice broken. "All those years, the struggles, the quiet sadness, she carried it all alone." Her grief was raw, laced with the bitter taste of a profound betrayal, not by her mother, but by the circumstances that had forced such a terrible choice upon her. Michael, however, felt a different kind of fire ignite within him. It was a cold, simmering rage at his grandfather, Arthur, for his cowardice, for abandoning his family and leaving his wife to bear such a monstrous secret. But it was also a fierce, protective love for his grandmother, Eleanor, and a sudden, overwhelming respect for her immense sacrifice. The image of her gentle smile, always present despite the hidden pain, now took on a new, heartbreaking dimension. He looked at his father, Elias, whose face was a mask of shock and sorrow, finally understanding the true depth of his mother's burden. "There's more," Mr. Thompson said, his voice barely audible, as he reached into his file again. He pulled out a small, yellowed envelope, much older than the other papers. "Eleanor gave this to me years ago with strict instructions. It was only to be opened if something unexpected happened during the final settlement of the estate, or if the truth of Arthur's departure ever came to light." He carefully handed the envelope to Elias. Elias's hands trembled as he took the envelope. It felt surprisingly heavy, as if it contained not just paper, but years of suppressed emotion, of untold stories. He looked at Clara, then at Michael, whose eyes were fixed on the envelope with a desperate intensity. The room was silent once more, but this time, it was a silence charged with anticipation, with the electric current of a truth waiting to be fully revealed. This was the last moment, the precipice of understanding, where the whispered secrets were finally about to be laid bare, promising either utter devastation or, perhaps, a glimmer of the hope they had all long forgotten. The yellowed envelope felt strangely warm in Elias's trembling hands, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in his chest. It was sealed with a faint, almost invisible wax stamp, bearing a delicate, familiar floral pattern, his mother's favorite lily. He remembered her often pressing flowers between the pages of books, preserving their fleeting beauty. This envelope, he realized, was more than just a document. It was a time capsule, a final, intimate communication from a woman who had spent her life guarding secrets. Clara leaned in, her breath shallow, her eyes, red-rimmed from unshed tears, fixed on the envelope with a desperate intensity. Michael, usually so composed, was practically vibrating with a raw, unspoken urgency, his gaze darting from the envelope to his father's face, then to Mr. Thompson, demanding answers without a word. With a deep, shaky breath, Elias carefully broke the seal. The paper crackled softly, a sound that seemed to echo loudly in the hushed office. Inside, nestled amongst a few brittle, folded documents, was a single, handwritten letter. His mother's elegant, familiar script, slightly faded with time, filled the page. Elias's eyes scanned the opening lines, and a wave of emotion, so potent it stole his breath, washed over him. It was a letter addressed to him and Clara, written years ago, a final confession, a last testament to her enduring love and the impossible choices she had made. The first few paragraphs detailed the devastating truth of Arthur's fraud, confirming Mr. Thompson's words. Eleanor wrote of the crushing debt, the threats from Reginald Thorne and his associates, and the stark choice she faced. Watch her husband go to prison and expose her children to public shame and financial ruin, or make a deal that would cost her her own peace, but protect her family. She chose the latter, sacrificing her own happiness to ensure their future. She wrote of the loneliness of carrying such a burden, the constant fear of exposure, and the quiet agony of watching her children grow up believing their father was simply a failure, rather than a criminal whose actions she had painstakingly covered. But as Elias read further, his eyes catching on a specific paragraph, his expression shifted from sorrow to a profound, disbelieving shock. Clara, unable to bear the suspense, reached out and gently took the letter from his trembling fingers, her gaze falling upon the same lines. Michael, leaning over her shoulder, read along, his breath hitching. The words on the page were a revelation, a twist so unexpected, so utterly improbable, that it momentarily stunned them all into a collective silence. Eleanor's letter explained that the agreement with Reginald Thorne wasn't just about Arthur disappearing. It was also about a hidden asset, a final desperate attempt by Arthur to secure their future, even as he fled. He had invested a small, legitimate portion of his remaining capital, unbeknownst to Eleanor at the time, into a nascent technology company. A company that, at the time of Eleanor's writing the letter, was still small, a long shot, a forgotten promise. But the letter went on to detail a clause in that investment, a small percentage of ownership, tied to a specific, almost impossible condition. If the company ever reached a certain valuation, a portion of its shares would be transferred to a trust for Elias and Clara, a way to secretly repay the debt Arthur felt he owed them, a final act of a desperate man trying to secure his children's future, even if he couldn't be a part of it. And then, the most astonishing part. Eleanor had included a recent news clipping, folded neatly within the letter. It was a financial report, dated just weeks before her passing. The technology company Arthur had invested in, the forgotten long shot, had not only reached its valuation target but had exceeded it exponentially. It was now a global giant, a household name, its shares worth an unimaginable fortune. The trust, set up years ago, was now active. The forgotten promise was not just a memory. It was a tangible, colossal reality. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and choked sounds. Elias's face, still pale from the shock of his mother's sacrifice, now contorted into an expression of utter disbelief, tinged with a nascent, overwhelming joy. Clara let out a sob, a mix of heartbreak for her mother's silent suffering and overwhelming relief at this impossible turn of events. Michael, his eyes wide, looked from the letter to his father, then to his aunt, his mind reeling. The whispered secret at the last moment revealed wasn't just about Arthur's fraud. It was about a hidden act of redemption, a desperate gamble that had paid off decades later, rekindling a hope they never knew existed. The weight of the past was still there, but now, a blinding light had pierced through the darkness, promising a future none of them had ever dared to dream of. The initial explosion of shock and disbelief gradually subsided, giving way to a stunned, almost reverent silence. The news clipping, now spread flat on the table, seemed to glow with an impossible light, its headlines screaming of a technological empire that had risen from the ashes of their family's deepest shame. Elias, Clara, and Michael stared at it, their minds struggling to reconcile the decades of quiet struggle, the silent burdens, with this sudden, overwhelming abundance. It was as if a long-lost treasure map had finally led them to a fortune they never knew was buried, right beneath the very ground they walked on. Mr. Thompson, who had witnessed countless dramatic reveals in his long career, watched them with a mix of professional satisfaction and genuine awe. Even he, privy to Eleanor's secret instructions, had not fully grasped the sheer magnitude of Arthur's final, desperate gamble. Elias was the first to speak, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. All these years. Mother. She knew. The question hung in the air, laden with a fresh wave of grief for Eleanor's silent suffering. She had carried this knowledge, this immense, hidden hope, while living a life of quiet sacrifice, never hinting at the potential that lay dormant, waiting for its moment to awaken. The injustice of her solitary burden, even with this miraculous outcome, felt sharper, more poignant. He remembered the small, wooden music box in the old house, the one she had called a special promise. A sudden, chilling realization dawned on him. Could that music box hold another piece of this intricate puzzle? Clara, still clutching Eleanor's letter, shook her head, tears streaming freely down her face. But these were tears of a different kind now, tears of sorrow for her mother's past, mixed with tears of overwhelming gratitude and a dawning sense of liberation. She didn't just know Elias, Clara murmured, her voice thick with emotion. She protected it. She guarded this promise, this hope, knowing it might never materialize, but holding on to it for us. This wasn't just Arthur's gamble. It was her enduring faith. The bitterness she had harbored for her father's abandonment began to recede, replaced by a profound respect for her mother's unwavering strength and foresight. Michael, his initial outrage at Arthur's fraud now tempered by the astonishing revelation, felt a complex mix of emotions. He had always admired his grandmother's quiet resilience, but this new information elevated her to a legendary status in his mind. She hadn't just endured. She had strategically, silently, ensured their future. His gaze fell on the news clipping, then back to Eleanor's elegant handwriting. "So, the trust is active now?" he asked Mr. Thompson, his voice filled with a newfound, almost breathless, anticipation. "What does this mean, practically?" Mr. Thompson, regaining his composure, nodded. "It means, Michael, that the trust is indeed fully funded. The shares were transferred upon the company reaching its valuation target, as per the original agreement. And the value is substantial, more than enough to clear all of Eleanor's estate liabilities, and leave a significant amount for both Elias and Clara as beneficiaries of the trust." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "The old house, it no longer needs to be sold to settle debts. It is now part of the assets of the trust, to be managed as you see fit." The revelation about the house hit Elias with a fresh wave of emotion. The house, the symbol of their family's decline, the place he had just prepared to sever ties with, was now theirs again, unburdened. It was a tangible representation of the rekindled hope, a physical space where new memories could be built, free from the shadows of the past. He thought of the dusty living room, the creaking stairs, his mother's beloved garden. A profound sense of peace, alien and overwhelming, began to settle over him. The resentment he had carried for Arthur, for the financial ruin and the abandonment, began to soften, replaced by a complex understanding of a desperate man's final, flawed attempt at redemption. Clara, her eyes fixed on the news clipping, suddenly looked up, a spark of an idea igniting in her gaze. "The house?" she murmured. "Mother loved that house. She always said it held a special promise, a secret hope." Her words echoed Elias's earlier memory of the music box. A shared glance passed between them, a silent communication of a newly understood connection to their mother's hidden messages. The whispered secrets were not just about Arthur's past, but about Eleanor's enduring foresight and her quiet, unwavering belief in a future she had fought to secure for them. The path forward, once shrouded in uncertainty and regret, was now illuminated by an unexpected, blinding light. The days that followed the revelation in Mr. Thompson's office were a whirlwind of activity. Yet beneath the surface, a profound healing began. Elias and Clara, now united by a shared understanding of their mother's immense sacrifice, spent hours talking, sifting through old memories, piecing together the fragments of Eleanor's life that had been obscured by the weight of her secret. The resentment that had simmered between them for years, fueled by unspoken grievances and misunderstandings, began to dissolve, replaced by a deep, empathetic bond forged in the crucible of their shared past. They visited the old house, no longer with the heavy heart of imminent loss, but with a newfound sense of ownership and possibility. The dust still danced in the sunlight, but now it felt like shimmering particles of potential, not ghosts of sorrow. Michael, with his keen, analytical mind, took on the task of understanding the intricacies of the trust. He worked closely with Mr. Thompson, delving into the details of Arthur's investment, the conditions of the trust, and the astonishing growth of the technology company. He discovered that Arthur, in his final desperate act of trying to secure a future for his children, had chosen a company that was, against all odds, built on a foundation of genuine innovation and ethical practices, a stark contrast to his own past dealings. This revelation added another layer of complexity to Arthur's character, making him less of a villain and more of a deeply flawed man who, in his own twisted way, had tried to make amends. Michael felt a strange sense of closure, a quiet understanding that finally allowed him to reconcile with his grandfather's memory, not with forgiveness for the fraud, but with a nuanced acceptance of the man he was. One afternoon, Elias found himself back in his mother's old room, drawn by the lingering thought of the music box. He picked it up, the smooth wood feeling different now, imbued with a new significance. He remembered Eleanor's words. It holds a special promise, a secret hope. He turned it over and over in his hands, searching for a hidden catch, a secret compartment. And then, his thumb brushed against a tiny, almost invisible indentation on the underside. With a soft click, a small panel slid open, revealing not a keyhole, but a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. Inside, in Eleanor's familiar script, were just a few lines. My dearest Elias and Clara, if you are reading this, then the promise has awakened. The hope I guarded for you. Remember this, true wealth is not in riches, but in the bonds we share and the kindness we extend. Use this gift not just for yourselves, but to mend what was broken, and to build a future filled with light. The music box holds the key to a different kind of melody now. Love, Mother. Elias felt a profound peace settle over him. The forgotten promise was not just the financial windfall. It was Eleanor's enduring message, a final act of guidance. The music box, once silent, now seemed to hum with the melody of her love and foresight. He shared the note with Clara and Michael, and they stood together in the quiet room, tears in their eyes, but smiles on their faces. The bitterness of the past had truly dissipated, replaced by a shared sense of purpose and a renewed connection. In the months that followed, Elias and Clara, guided by Eleanor's final words, didn't just enjoy their newfound fortune. They established a foundation in their mother's name, dedicated to supporting young entrepreneurs with ethical business ideas, giving them the chance Arthur never had, and helping those burdened by financial injustice. Michael, now a key figure in the foundation, found his true calling, using his sharp mind to ensure that the forgotten promise would continue to create positive change for others. The old house, no longer a symbol of debt, became the foundation's headquarters, a place where new dreams were fostered, and where the echoes of Eleanor's kindness resonated in every room. The whispered secrets at the last moment revealed had not only brought them wealth but had rekindled their hope, healed their family, and transformed their lives into a living testament to Eleanor's enduring legacy of love and compassion.